Part say that the French are treating slaves with equality. They're not. But they legally definitely are better treated there than they are in the English system, as you're about to see. Which is also why, in places like New Orleans, you will have families, leading families in New Orleans in the colonial period, who openly have African ancestry. That it's a known thing. Okay, that's what the Creole kind of concept becomes. That is never the case in English society. And why not? Well, because the English simply passed rules against it. As the English realized that they needed slavery, and that they wanted slavery, they needed to pass laws to protect slavery, to codify slavery. They're not protecting the slaves. These are laws to protect the slave owner. So if something exists, but it's not legally protected, somebody says, well, I need you to pass a law saying it's okay for me to do this. That way I know what rights I have. And so those laws say you can keep them forever. You can treat them however you want to. Okay? Well, what about if you father kids with them? This becomes a big issue, because if a master has a set of white kids and a set of kids born to a slave, how do the white kids feel about that? Do they see these as, this is my brother and my sister?
No.
No, there are threats to their inheritance, they're a threat to their future, and so they don't want that. So we need to pass a law to determine what exactly is the child of a master and slave. Well, in England, you are your father's kid. You inherit the status of your father. That is English law for 1,000 years. And suddenly, in colonial Virginia, the law says you are your mother's child. They completely go against their own basic concepts. And why did they do this?
To prevent the slave kids from being able to get the same status.
If the master is the man having sex with his slave who's a female, then those kids are slaves because they're inherited by the mom. And if the only people who are enslaved are black, what is the ethnicity of that kid? Black. What if that kid has a kid with a white person, another master? What if, for as far as you can go, there are slave women having kids by their masters, and yet they are 30 seconds white?
Doesn't
Why
matter.
are they black?
They're still black.
They're black. It's called the one-drop rule. If you can prove there's any African ancestry in your past, you are defined as black in America. That is unique to the United States. Nobody else did that. Everybody else had this whole system of how white, how black are you. Not true in the U.S. Now, if nobody knows that you have black ancestry, then you'll be white. And that's how crazy this concept becomes. So the idea that race is a social construct is exactly that. If I don't know you're black, then you're white. But if I know you have black ancestry, you're black, what are we talking about? We're just making it up. But they're making it up to protect themselves. That's what the law was meant to do. To guarantee that I have a right to do this. And also, what about, this is another big issue. If you're a Christian and you have slaves, are your slaves supposed to be Christians? Well, one of the laws they passed is, yes, your slaves should be Christians, but we'll ignore the part of Christianity where it seems to guarantee equality and just say that doesn't count here. So you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to free your slaves when they become Christians. They're not actually your brothers and sisters. In fact, you've done them a favor. They're going to get to go to heaven now. Good for you, master. That's how the English cope with this. In 1739 in South Carolina, the Stonewall Rebellion happens where slaves rise up against their masters in the hopes of marching down to Florida, which belongs to the Spanish, and they're hoping to freedom. They're actually stopped along the way because you can't have this. Slave rebellions are bad for slavery. Well, what is the response in South Carolina? They begin to pass more laws to control the slaves. And these are called black codes or slave codes. So this is an attempt to make sure that we all understand black people do not have rights. They are property. You can do whatever you want to with them. You don't have to free them. You don't have to do any of that stuff. Treat them however you want to. Again, this only happens because they need slavery. If they didn't, they wouldn't bother with it. But as they realize how important it is to their economy and they can't let it go, this is famously Thomas Jefferson's quote about slavery. Slavery is like holding a wolf by the ears. I don't like it, but I dare not let it go, because it'll rip my throat out. And that's what slavery becomes. I hate it, but I need it, and I'm going to do these things. It is all defined on color, and again, that is only skin. All right, there are a number of historians who have studied this, and that's what the rest of the PowerPoint is talking about. They have done studies of what you see in the early years of the colonies when slavery is not that big a deal. You have a situation in which slaves seem to be treated with relative respect. That's not called equality, but respect. But as slavery increases, the way slaves are treated actually becomes much worse. Which leads us then to where we're going to end our PowerPoints today, is the life of provincial America. This word provincial means the sticks, out in the country, the hicks. So the people who come to settle in the English colonies are not the best and brightest of England. They're viewed as being provincial. If somebody says you're very provincial, they just insulted you. They just said, you're not very bright. I am from the sticks. I know exactly what that means. Okay, people out there, a bunch of hicks. Okay, so that is the way the Americans are viewed. That's why they do not like the term American, because they know that it has that connotation. If you think about Yankee Doodle Dandy, that song, stuck a feather in his hat and called it macaroni, he's an idiot. Right? It's not macaroni the pasta, it's actually a particular style of fancy clothing from Europe, but still, it's this, you guys pretend to be something, but you're not, you're all a bunch of hicks. Most people who came to America are not rich. Some were, most are not. Okay, in some places you have the you have the middle class. That's really true in like New England, but in the deep South, or in the South, I guess, the deep South and the colonial South, the majority of the population are actually indentured servants. They are the largest single group. They make about 3/4 of the population of the Chesapeake region. Again, that's the part of the South that existed for most of the 1600s. So 75% of the people who came to the South in the 1600s came as indentured servants. And that's not really a story we tell at Thanksgiving and things like that, but that's the reality. And there'll be less so as you go farther to the north, but still a lot of indentured servants here as well. Of the a fourth of the population, of the 3/4 of the population that are indentured servants, about a fourth of them are women. Women are not brought over to work in the fields. That's actually not even the law. Doesn't want them to do that. But that's not what they're here for. They're here to do traditional female jobs. They make up altogether about 19-20% of the population. It just depends on which decade you're looking in. Some women make up in the South 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5, eventually 1 out of 3, 1 out of 2. But they're clearly outnumbered by men. And we'll talk about why that matters later on. If you're a woman, why would you come to America? Men are coming because the dream is, when I'm free, I'll get my own land. Why would a woman come? What is their job? What's their job as defined in their own religion, please?
Childcare.
To be a mother. So if there are, back in England, a town that has 15 men and 16 women, not all those women are going to get married. And actually, as the women age, they age out of marital age, and the men don't. So the average age at which a woman marries in England is actually quite young, because they are kicking people out of the system pretty early on. You go read about that, read Jane Austen. That's what she's talking about. These are teenage girls who think, I'm never going to get married. I'm already too old. Because this 30-year-old man is just going to pass me by for someone who's a few years younger who can give him more kids for a longer period of time. So they're obsessed with this. I'm going to work for you for a period of time, and when I'm done, I will gain my freedom, if I survive, and then I will be able to start a life as somebody's wife. That's the dream. In the early 1700s, the first few decades of the 1700s, the majority of the people who came to the colonies from England were criminals. That's not true in the 1600s. But by the early 1700s, indentured servitude had declined, which produced the majority of the population. So there isn't a lot of people choosing to come to America. Instead, England is dumping people in America. They're emptying their prisons. These prisons may be debtor prisons, real prisons, prisoners of war. The Scottish particularly keep rebelling against the English at this time. And so orphans, that's happening. There is kidnapping and impressment. In fact, one man kidnapped 100 kids and sold them into indentured servitude in America. For that, he was executed. That was a crime. But he still did it for quite a while. So remember, not everybody wants to be here, even from England. We've already talked about this, but having people who are promised a freedom in their job who don't get it, they're not going to be happy, they can't vote, if there are 3 men competing for 1 woman, the guy who's living illegally on someone else's land is going to have a hard time competing for that 1 woman. If you went to the north, you might find that life was better for you. If you were an indentured servant to a blacksmith, what are you going to do once your job is over? Be a blacksmith. And maybe your town doesn't need one, but maybe the town down the road does. That's not the same thing as you're promised land to be a farmer, nobody gave you any land. So the ways of advancement may be better in the north. You might prefer to move to the north if you have choice in the matter. Again, doesn't mean it's an easy life, but that might work better. And as indentured servitude declines in the south, permanent African slavery takes its place. The north had a higher ratio of women because they came over more as families, and so they began to have children earlier, and the ratio of men and women equaled out faster. Also, life expectancy in the north is better because the winters are worse, which you may think, well, that sounds terrible. That just means that's less time you actually have to work. So if you live up in the north, you have a lot of time off. In the south, you plant eventually cotton. We're not there yet still. But you plant cotton in April, you harvest it in December. That's a lot of time to be out there working in the field. And it's hot for a big chunk of the year. So the north is simply not, the physical work is not as exhausting as it is in the south. They have a longer recovery time because of the winters, and so they do typically live longer. We're going to talk about the south for a little bit. Life expectancy in the south for men is about the age of 40. For women, it's slightly less. What would be less for women?
You're a lot more likely to die.
Childbirth is a risk they have that men simply do not have. 1 in 4 kids dies before the age of 2. If your mother is not all that healthy when she gives birth to you, you're probably not all that healthy. You're just as exposed to the problems that the adults are, if you're not even more vulnerable. 1 in 2 children die before the age of 20. So imagine you are a parent, you have kids, and you know that half of them are not going to reach adulthood. Now this has led to some people arguing that therefore death is no big deal for them. That is not what any records seem to prove. That may be rather stoic as they cope with it, but the concept that, oh well, a kid died, no big deal. No, it seems like it's a big deal to them, even as common as it is. If men are living to be the age of 40 and women are getting married around the age of 21, that's pretty much the average. And men are probably marrying a few years older than that because they want one. Men in these situations, men typically marry older than women because men need more time to become financially successful and therefore guaranteeing a better life for their wife and their kids. So you typically see a variation there. So let's say a man is 30 and his wife is 21, and he's going to die in 10 years. Okay, or let's say he's 35, he's going to die in 5 years. His wife is still going to be relatively young, and his kids will be very young. But women cannot legally own land. It's called coverture. And what it means is that once a woman marries, all of her possessions belong to her husband. No longer belong to her. And so if they have kids, all his property passes on to his children, not to his wife. People are dying from mosquito-borne illnesses, especially in the south, like malaria and yellow fever. And again, a newborn is just as exposed to that as anybody else. And simply, they last longer. You need about 2 weeks incubation for this to happen. If you were to look at slavery in the South, you would see that the farther south you go, the more slavery there is until you don't get that much. If you look at mosquito-borne illnesses, they're much greater in the South. The farther north you go, they're not that way. So typically, a place like up here in New England, the incubator has to stay above 60 degrees for 2 weeks. You might have a hot day in the summer, but it still might fall below 60 degrees at night. And so again, there's simply less exposure to that in the north, which helps explain part of why the life expectancy is so low. Doesn't mean there aren't yellow fever outbreaks. There are 1793 Philadelphia, when it's the capital of the U.S., huge outbreak. But for the most part, much more that's going on in the South. So you are a man. Listen, there are 3 men competing for 1 woman. She's an indentured servant. You got another 21-year-old man. He's an indentured servant. Says, "Hey, let's get married. I don't own any land. I'm a servant. We'll probably be dead soon. What do you say?" And then there's a 30-year-old man who's down the road. He says, "I've got my own farm. I'm free. I need a wife, and I need a bunch of kids, and we're going to work this together." And there's a 35-year-old man down the road who says, "I own 100 slaves. I need a wife and kids. Marry me. You'll never have to work. The kids will never work." Which one is the woman going to pick?
Probably the
I ain't saying
35.
she's a gold digger, because she's not. What is her job?
Make kids.
And she needs to pick the best person to produce the best life for her children. Yes, her as well, but it's the kids. Which of these, if there's a man who's saying that our kids will not have to work in the fields, that's the best life I can get for them. But if he's 35 and he dies within 5 years and your son is only 4, your son will inherit that 14 years from now. So what is this now 26-year-old woman, 25-year-old woman going to do? She needs to marry again. Because she needs a stepfather for her kids, she needs more kids, she needs more land, and if there's now a guy down the road who says, I own 10,000 acres, and you've already proved you can have children, I'll marry you, your kids will become my stepkids, they'll take over your husband's stuff, our kids will take over my stuff. And so through that way, women can actually negotiate a better life for themselves in a way they probably couldn't in England. But who's looking out for these women?
Nobody.
Only themselves.
Yeah.
Nobody else. So it's a very difficult road. It could lead to a better life. It could also get very dangerous. Because let's say there are 3 men who are trying to marry you, and they want to lock you down by getting you pregnant. And, oh, that's my child, we'll get married here. How might that be better for a woman if she's now pregnant as an indentured servant? Well, if the master's not the father, if it's some other guy, what might be about to happen here in this relationship? If you find out that there's an indentured servant who's bearing your child, what do you want for that woman? You want to stay an indentured servant? Freedom. So what may happen is a man may actually go and buy her freedom. That would be a better move for you as a woman. What if he doesn't?
You're stuck with a kid and working.
It is not your master's responsibility, if he's not the father, for your kid. The fact that you are not a good worker while you're pregnant. Your kid will be taken from you and raised by somebody else. And so for women, it's a really tight line of it. I might be able to improve my life by this, or I might be about to suffer greatly because of it. And so it is a very difficult thing. Now, if about half the children were conceived out of wedlock, and that seems to be what the numbers suggest, a third to half the population conceived out of wedlock, then probably it's no great stigma for this to happen. The stigma would be to be an unwed mother. That's the one that gets you. If you're pregnant and you get married, people probably move on from it. But if you're just out there by yourself with no one to take care of you, you can't own land, you can't vote, you have no authority, who's taking care of you? Nobody is. That's a really big problem. And so again, it can be better for women, it can be worse for women. It just depends on how this works out. And again, childbirth itself is a killer. Women on average have about 8 kids. About every 2 years they have kids, and then until they reach their life expectancy. Again, because women are outnumbered by men, it is quite possible that you have more say in your own life and more authority and more power, political power, but maybe some other power. As the ratio of men and women starts to equal out, women lose that. And so if I said in the early years that women in the South seem to be quite powerful, is that how we view women in the South today? We actually view the South as the most male-dominated by the Civil War. So something changed there. What changed is, as men became more confident that there's plenty of women for me, it's not me and 3 other guys competing for this one woman, there's one woman for each of us, then they cannot be too bothered by that. So for me, as a guy who is getting older all the time, it has never been that big a deal to me as a man because I'm still technically able to have children. But the women my age that I know, that's no longer true for them. And so they may be more resigned to the fact that it will never happen for them in a way that has never actually bothered me. I'm sure I won't either, but it's not something I deal with and wrestle with in a way that my friends who are my age, who remain single their life, actually have to deal with. People live longer, though, the more you adjust to what's going on, you do better. In New England, we see that things are a little bit different. Again, the ratio of men to women is more equal. Still more men than women, so women still marry young. Still have 8 kids on average. They probably have kids until they no longer can have kids because of menopause, not because they're actually dying in their late 30s. So if you are a widow who becomes a widow when you are 40, are you as desirable to a man for remarriage? No. Your kids may already be adults, so he's not going to be able to run your estate or anything. And you can't have kids for him. So, I mean, well, you may want a partner in life. Those other advantages don't seem to be there. And so here now women may be more of a burden on their families. And that's what widows and orphans, that becomes part of the narrative in all sorts of cultures, that who's going to take care of these women once they reach that stage in life. Also, if you're part of a family, it's much more likely that your father plays a role in who you can marry. These are not arranged marriages in the sense you're being married off to a stranger. But let's say I'm a farmer, and next to me is another farmer, and I've got a son, and he's got a daughter. We might say, let's get our son and daughter married together. So people marry for like and not love in these scenarios. I know you, we get along well enough, we think we can probably go together. That may be the big thing. Or let's say I'm in business. I make shoes, and I do business with a guy who sells me leather, and again, maybe we got kids who want to marry him off. because women need to, again, if you're the only woman and there's three men competing for you, being the only woman is really all you need to advertise yourself. If men are feeling more confident that they can have their pick of women, then women need to set themselves apart by saying, look what I can do. Whether it's my dad's giving me a dowry, where he's giving us this money, or that piece of property, I own my own spinning thread, I can do all these sort of things to make money. Again, look at Jane Austen, the accomplished woman concept. I have all these skills that'll bring you pride and honor, but also make you more money. I can cook, and I can make clothing, I can do these sort of things. That's all part of it. There's a midwife in Maine. Her name is Martha Ballard. She's a midwife in the late 1700s and the 1800s, and she delivered some 400 kids in her career as a midwife. And she said of the kids she delivered, about 40% were conceived out of wedlock. That either the parents were not married at the time of the birth, or they had married clearly after the pregnancy had taken place. So again, probably not that big a deal. She brought in girls from the neighborhood and she taught them, once she's a midwife, so that's making extra money. She taught them how to warp cloth, she said, which is weaving cloth. So she was actually bringing in teenage girls saying, I'm going to teach you skills so that when men are looking at you, you can say, look at all the ways I can bring stuff to our life. Now, if a woman got pregnant and was not married at the time of giving birth, this was a problem in the community. And so if that happened, the women of the community would come into the room where the woman was giving birth and say, who's the father? So they believed that at the time that you could not lie while giving birth. And so they thought the purity of the pain of childbirth would make it impossible to lie. So they would say, who's the father? Why do the woman want to know who the father of this child is? All right, that's a very cynical answer. We often think of a bunch of old busybodies here to attack them. And that's probably not correct. Who benefits by this woman giving birth to a child when she's unmarried? Does she benefit? Does the child benefit? Who benefited? The man. What they're saying is, who did this to you? Why aren't you married? Why isn't he taking responsibility? If it is my husband, he's about to pay you some money. And if it's not a married man, he's about to become a married man. So Martha's actually delivering a child. And the women come in and say, who did this? And the woman says, Martha's son. And so Martha delivers this baby and says, I'll be right back. And she goes to her son and says, is this your child? And he goes, yeah. And she goes, well, come meet your wife and kid, because my grandkid is not going to die because you refuse to do the right thing. So we were actually protecting each other and fighting for each other because they realize how little power they have in society. They have to join forces. Now, once pregnancy out of marriage becomes less common, then you start to get the classic judgment and all that sort of stuff. But if it's just pretty basic, that's not quite there. Salem witch trials, and I'll probably just end on this. Salem witch trials are a part of this. Again, Salem is not actually the big city; it's a small village. A couple things: they do believe in witchcraft. They do believe the devil is working out there. This preacher, likes to read witch stories to his daughter and some other people, and then they start to freak out. And so maybe he planted a seed in them. But they start to have these physical outbursts, and people say they've been bewitched. And they say, "Who did this to you?" They say, "That woman there." And in all those cases, that woman was the most hated woman in the community. Right? Whether she was an outsider, a woman who refused to play well with the men, she didn't come to church very much, she was not the same ethnicity like the slave woman Tituba. And so we don't know exactly why there's those witch trials. We don't know if they literally believe you can be bewitched. We don't know if that's what's happened, if they're faking it, if they're tripping on mushrooms, if they are suffering from ergot poisoning, which is anthrax. We don't really know what's happened. What we know is the people who get blamed are the most vulnerable members of society, the ones they've heard their parents talking bad about at the dinner table. And so we like that. Something bad has happened, who can I blame? Oh, I can blame the person who's the most obviously different from us, or the one that none of us likes. But where's the evidence for this? Where's the proof that leads to the execution of 20 people for witchcraft? Yeah, there is no proof except this thing called spectral evidence, which is, I'm in the witness box, you bring in the accused, I have a fit right here and now, that's proof of guilt. Now, we would throw that out immediately in the court system today. That is their number one proof of guilt. And so that's what a witch trial is. A witch trial is not, you've done something bad and maybe people are taking it too far. A witch trial is, there is no evidence you've done anything wrong at all, and yet you're being destroyed for it. It came to an end because people hate chaos. Once you start accusing my wife, now I'm gonna put my foot down. When I accuse that old lady over there, I don't care for who was fighting for her. But eventually it comes to an end as people become concerned with this. So you can see all these issues are there in society. All right, lots of people came from lots of places. They brought with them their various things. If you look at the map when it comes to religion, what you'll see is that it's hard to impose any one religion. The church faith is the official one because there's so much diversity, as we'll talk about. And we'll see how that plays a role into the foundation of the concept of we, the United States, of the founding fathers. I'm done. I've pretty much made it to the end of the PowerPoint, so that's what's on it. Everything in the PowerPoint we've covered, they're all posted in Blackboard, so you can see them, they're all numbered. And I'll see you on Monday. Bring your schedule. If you want to talk to me beforehand, email me your essay, all those sort of things. Get it done before we have class on Monday. If I go to bed on Sunday night, I'm not going to get up and read it.
Where is the bookstore? I can show you.
There is no question on the exam that I didn't talk about. The textbook will give you more information or maybe a different perspective, but there's no specific book questions that were not also listed. I just wanted to